In this video we want to talk about economies of scale. We want to talk about economies due to the size of the organization and to the changing sizes of the organization. These occur when mass producing a good results in lower average costs. So economies of scale happen when a company is growing and lower average costs result as a consequence of that growth. Economies of scale occur within a firm. These are called internal economies of scale, and also within an industry, which could be classified as external economies of scale. The individual company benefits as a consequence of the expansion of the overall market or the expansion of the industry. The first point to note here with economies of scale is that we're dealing with the long run. Now, if we look at what we expect the long run average cost to be, the LASE, long run average costs, we can see that we expect the long run average cost to fall and then to increase. Now it's the long run because the long run is in which that period of time in which companies plan. They work in the short run. Companies work in the short run. They're working on a day-to-day basis. They're working in the here and now. That's the short run. In the long run, it's what they are planning. The long run hasn't happened. It's where they anticipate they're going to be in a year, 5 years, or whatever period of time. Now, costs in the long run average costs, in other words, they may be seen as falling, and they fall because perhaps the company is growing. But you'll see from the diagram that at some stage the costs start to increase again. First of all, they're falling, and then they start to increase. And we'll see why this is possible. Why we have, in other words, economies of scale, economies due to the size, and then we have diseconomies of scale. We can have companies that are too big and become expensive producers. Now it's seen, particularly by economists, that this is a fairly typical pattern for businesses. Businesses in the near period of time, the period of time over the next perhaps 3 to 5 years, something of that nature, they will start to benefit from expansion. They'll get more efficient ways of producing their product. But if they continue to grow, they will become too big, too bureaucratic, too cumbersome, not responsive to customer needs. They will become inefficient producers. They suffer from diseconomies of scale. And what we're going to do in this session is to look at sources of economies of scale, diseconomies of scale, internal economies, external economies, and so on. So we'll look at these under various headings. We'll start with internal economies of scale. These are economies made within a firm as a result of mass production. So when a company starts to produce an item in volume, it starts to benefit from internal economies of scale. There could be, for example, technical economies made in the production of the good. For example, companies may use specialized machinery, and they may be able to use the machinery intensively. So these are technical economies. Can only happen when the company is growing and is at a good size. Small companies may not be able to use capital efficiently. It may be lying idle for some of the time. There are also managerial economies made in the administration of a firm by splitting up management jobs and employing specialist accountants and specialist marketing personnel and specialist HR people. Now, specialist marketing people will be more efficient at marketing than others, so they will have greater productivity. Specialist engineers will have greater productivity than general engineers. So there will be managerial economies. Managerial economies due to size. There are also financial economies made by borrowing money at lower rates of interest than, for example, smaller firms. Banks may lend to larger companies because there's less risk. They're able to lend to those companies at a lower rate of interest. There can be marketing economies made by spreading the high cost of advertising on television and in the national newspapers across a large level of output. So sometimes companies just market their name, and under their name are various products. So there can be marketing economies. And gathering information in the market is cheaper. To gather it for one product, they may be gathering it for a second product as well. Commercial economies made when buying supplies in bulk and gaining a larger discount. Larger companies are able to negotiate better terms than smaller companies. So there's an advantage to being big. Research and development economies may be achieved. So specialist testing equipment is more intensively used, which means that it's cheaper. Per unit it's cheaper. Research and development is costly and it's quite speculative. It may yield results or it may not. But if there's a specialist department, good personnel, good equipment, there's a better chance of getting good results. And larger organizations are better at research and development. And these are all internal economies of scale. Now there are external economies of scale, ones which are outside of the company. So if, for example, the industry is expanding, the company, the individual company, may benefit from the industry expanding. All the businesses in the industry are expanding, individual companies may benefit as a consequence. These are known as external economies of scale. So, for example, a local skill force, labour force I should say, a local labour force may be available, and these may be skilled in the ways of that industry. This can happen regionally as well. Some regions may be noted for engineering, particular types of engineering, so that the local colleges supply courses on that type of engineering. The labour force tend to be quite skilled in that area, and the company benefits from being able to get skilled or semi-skilled workers quite easily. There may be specialist local backup firms that can supply parts and services. For example, in the car industry, the component suppliers are very important. So setting up a car plant may be influenced by the existence of companies that have the skills and the capability of supplying components. That's an external economy of size. The area may have a good transportation network, good rail network, or local airport, or good motorway connections, good connections by road. All of these will reduce the cost of the product. It'll facilitate production. It's an external economy of scale. The area may have a good reputation in producing the good, so that there's an economy in marketing because it comes from this area. The product comes from the area has a good reputation, so the product will enjoy the reputation of the area. In the past, more so than now, Sheffield was associated with steel, and very high quality steel products. Clearly over the years areas have changed, and now Sheffield is noted for many different types of product. But in the minds of many people, mentioning high quality steel products means associating it with Sheffield in the UK. Now there are internal diseconomies of scale. It means that the business is getting too big and there may be issues about costs increasing because the company is getting too big and too unwieldy, too difficult to control. The disadvantages of the division of labour take place when we have diseconomies of scale. Management becomes out of touch with the shop floor and some machinery becomes overmanned. Management find it difficult to control the organisation. It's difficult to control who's doing what and how it all fits together. It's too complex. So there's a loss of control and thereby costs increase. Decisions are not taken quickly and there's perhaps too much form filling, too much bureaucracy. Too much effort is spent on collecting information, not enough time spent on making quality decisions. There may be poor communications or even a lack of communication in a large organisation. This means that management tasks sometimes could be done twice or not be done at all. So poor communications means that instructions are not followed out precisely. The organisation is too big. The communication gets distorted in the process of communicating. And there could be poor labour relations because the workers on the shop floor don't relate to the top management. They don't know the top management. So there is no communications between them. There is a breakdown and poor labour relations may follow on from there. There are also external diseconomies of scale. Economies outside, diseconomies outside of the business which may force up the costs of the business. Local labour may become scarce and firms now have to offer higher wages to attract new workers. If a lot of companies go into the area because of the attraction of a skilled workforce, when the skilled workforce are employed, new companies coming in will have to now compete for the workforce and offer higher wages, higher salaries for some staff, and that will force up the price of the product. In other words, the industry has overgrown in a particular area. It could be in certain areas land and factory space becomes scarce and rents begin to rise. Again, forcing up the costs. The area has become associated with diseconomies of size. Local roads may become congested so that transport costs begin to rise as well. If some regions become very popular, then the road network may not be capable of coping with the extra traffic, so that distribution becomes expensive and again unit costs rise. So we have internal economies of scale, we have external economies of scale, internal diseconomies of scale and external diseconomies of scale. 4 components. In summary, the internal economies of scale, well, these economies made within the firm as a result of mass production. So the company grows, it's able to cut the cost of borrowing, it's able to have specialist research and development, specialist labour and so on, all of which heads towards reducing unit costs. External economies of scale, better facilities outside, better communications networks, road systems, rail, airports, better education within the area specialised to the industry, better external economies of scale. The area gets tooled up to service the industry. But there are also internal diseconomies of scale, diseconomies of size. Disadvantages of the division of labour. In other words, the workflow has been broken down into very small tasks. The workers become bored, they become alienated from the business, they don't relate to the business, they're not motivated. The channels of communications within the business become increasingly difficult. Misunderstandings start to arise. It's difficult for management to control a large business. So these are all diseconomies of scale. Diseconomies, the business has got too big. And we also have the external factors that increase costs. As I said, the road networks may become congested, or it could be the case that the existing supply of labour becomes scarce, so that the company has to pay significantly more for labour and unit costs rise. So if we go back to our picture from earlier on, we now have an idea of what causes economies of scale, economies of size, leading to reductions in the long run average cost. And we also have diseconomies of scale, which lead to increasing average costs. So companies in the long run, we may expect costs to fall, then to bottom out, and then to start to increase. So we have this, what we call U-shaped. I know it's not a U, but it sort of looks like a U. We call it a U-shaped average cost, long run average cost. And that is actually quite popular in economics. It's a major issue in modern microeconomics. But we're not going to look ahead here to any great extent. We've already done that by looking at these notes. In fact, that's all we need to say now about economies of scale and diseconomies of scale. So let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.